Welcome back to Steel City Sports. So today is part one of our video series where we rank all 32 starting quarterbacks in the NFL. And the one thing you have to understand about this list is it's not necessarily based off their stats from this season. I think that's a boring way to look at this, to be like, oh, well this guy actually had a higher QBR than this guy. No, I don't want to do that shit. I think that's boring. You can go look at the stats on your own. What we're doing today is a much more free-flowing, opinion-based video where I'm going to be ranking the 32 guys based on who do I want as my quarterback going into next year to win the Super Bowl. And that's how I did my criteria for this. So I know a lot of teams had like 3 or 4, or in the Browns' case, 5 quarterbacks that started for them this season. I ultimately just made a decision. If a team had multiple starters this year, I just picked the one that I wanted to rank from their team. If I ranked every quarterback that started this year, I think there was like over 60 quarterbacks. So this video is already going to be long enough. I didn't want to drag it out even more. So I just made a decision for each team on which quarterback we're going to rank. But let's get into part one right now. Coming in at dead last place at 32, we have the Patriots quarterback, Mac Jones. I think it's clear they're done with him. They're going to be drafting a quarterback in the draft. So the Mac Jones era will be coming to an end. When it comes down to quarterbacks, when you really boil it down, I think it comes down to 3 key things to being a great quarterback. Number 1 is your arm ability. Number 2 is your athleticism, your ability to play make, scramble, get out of the pocket, extend plays. And number 3 would be your locker room / leadership. Mac Jones doesn't do any of these things at, I think, even a passable level. As a rookie, he was a serviceable game manager. I don't know what the hell happened to that. That's just gone. He has 0 athleticism and is a locker room cancer, butted head with Bill Belichick. I just don't really think there's anything of real value that Mac Jones provides to an NFL team, and there's a reason why the Patriots are going to be moving off him this offseason. And our runner-up for worst starting quarterback in the NFL is Desmond Ridder of the Atlanta Falcons. So Desmond Ridder, I feel like in a vacuum, is more talented than Mac Jones, especially from an athletic standpoint. However, the eye test has very little to show for Desmond Ridder, especially when he was in a situation this year that I thought would have been very quarterback-friendly, having Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts, Drake London. Those 3 guys were all drafted top 10s in each of their drafts at the skills position. We're going to talk about other guys on this list that have very little to work with. So Ridder had a lot of weapons to work with in Atlanta. He had a good offensive line. He was playing in the weakest division in the NFL. He had an offensive head coach. There's so many check marks that would lead you to believe this is actually a really good spot for a quarterback. And if Ridder couldn't succeed there, I don't see him having really any success on any other team. At number 30, we have Bryce Young, the former number 1 overall pick. Had kind of a disastrous rookie year. I'm not going to deny that. However, I will say some of it is not his fault. When you look at Carolina just from an organizational standpoint, they're a complete shit show. The guy running it is a complete nutcase. David Tepper, I think, is the worst owner in the NFL. You combine that with the fact that his head coach, Frank Reich, didn't even last the entire season. They didn't really have much for him to work with on that offense, unlike Desmond Ridder. So it's like, yeah, he was disappointing, but also look at the mess you sent him to in Carolina. And on top of that, I feel like people talking about him being a bust is definitely played up more for the fact that the guy who was drafted right after him was C.J. Stroud. And C.J. Stroud had the greatest rookie season in the history of the NFL. So anytime you're drafted before that guy, it's going to look bad. But yeah, going forward, I'm not giving up on Bryce Young. Like I said, there were a lot of things working against him in Carolina, but the size does worry me. I've seen other guys succeed, like other smaller guys succeed, obviously like Kyler, like Drew Brees, like Russ, but Bryce just even feels a step down from those guys. He's very small. Like some of the pictures I've seen of Bryce Young look photoshopped when he's standing next to his offensive lineman. He's just tiny. So I'm not giving up on him yet, but it is looking a little concerning right now. At 29, we go from one shit show situation to another with the New York Jets quarterback, Zach Wilson. Again, similar to Bryce, I feel like there is a lot working against Zach Wilson, particularly this year where the organization basically admitted, we're done with this kid. We don't want him to be our quarterback. We're going to go get Aaron Rodgers. So they basically told the world, we don't want this guy to be our quarterback. And then the first drive of the season, Aaron goes down, and they're basically forced to throw Zach back out there. And he had a couple good performances this year, particularly the game against the Chiefs. I know they lost, but he looked pretty good. It's such a weird case with Zach Wilson because there are given moments where you can see why he was drafted so high. The arm talent is definitely there. It's the consistency he lacks. He is very shaky on his decision making. But you look at similar to what we just said about Bryce, like the mess that he has been in for his whole career. The New York Jets, I think, are one of the most poorly ran franchises in the NFL. I don't know if it's fair to say Zach Wilson would thrive in a different opportunity. But I think there is some talent there. It's just hasn't really materialized. And whether that's on him, whether that's on the Jets, I think that remains to be seen. And at 28, we have a team that had multiple different starters at the quarterback position, so I ultimately had to pick which one I was ranking from the Giants, and I went with Daniel Jones over Tommy DeVito. I know that was a fun time, but ultimately I went with the guy that they're paying $40 million to annually. I think is legit the worst contract in the entire NFL. We talked about that earlier in the season, whether it was Deshaun or Russ. I think it's clearly this is the worst contract in the NFL. You look at the season Daniel Jones was paid elite money for. His touchdown to interception ratio was 15-5. They gave him a $40 million annual contract for that. And then this year was, I can't even really put into words how big of a shit show the New York Giants were this year. Daniel Jones, before he got hurt, his touchdown to interception ratio was 2-6, which is just flat out dreadful. And going forward, it doesn't look very bright for the Giants. Like, even if they draft a quarterback this year, like, you're still going to have this guy making the amount of money he has on the team. I don't see a very bright future, but Brian Daboll, I mean, no matter what happens to Brian Daboll, if he gets fired or whatever, the crown jewel of Brian Daboll's career has to be the fact that he made Daniel Jones look good enough to earn that contract, because that is mind-blowing. And at 27, we have Jameis Winston 2.0 and Sam Howell going a season throwing as many touchdowns as he did interceptions. He's got some talent. There's definitely something there with his arm, but long-term, I think it's pretty clear he's not going to be a starter in the NFL. I think the Commanders are going to be drafting a new quarterback. He's one of the weird ones because, like, he can put up productive numbers, but he's just so reckless and makes too many boneheaded decisions. I get it, he's young, but the Commanders being in a position to draft one of these top quarterback prospects, it's pretty clear they're going to be moving off him. And at number 26, we have Aiden O'Connell. So it feels like the last time we talked about the Raiders on this channel was back when Josh McDaniel was fired, and they actually elevated O'Connell to be the starting quarterback over Garoppolo. So yeah, he was an upgrade over Jimmy G, but wow, that's impressive. Yeah, that's like saying you're the tallest kid in kindergarten. It doesn't mean anything. Jimmy Garoppolo is flat out washed. So to be better than that guy doesn't really impress me. Aiden O'Connell, I just think he's a very low ceiling guy. I don't really see much to build around there. I think he's not going to make like a ton of mistakes, but there's just very little wow factor there in terms of being a playmaker. He does get the ball to the playmakers, but I think it's clear the Raiders, they just need more from the quarterback position. You can't really, at least in my opinion, you can't win many games in today's NFL with this style of quarterback, with this low of a ceiling. At 25, we have Will Levis of the Tennessee Titans, the rookie this year. I can't remember if it was his first game in the NFL or maybe his second game, but he did have a game this year where he threw for 4 touchdowns, and it's clear that Will Levis has one thing you can build around. The guy has a fucking cannon of an arm. I mean, holy shit, the guy can throw it down the field. So if they build the right offense around this guy, you can definitely win games with Will Levis. He has the God-given arm talent to really succeed in the NFL, and I've even seen a little bit of athleticism that I like from Will Levis. So I think actually a promising guy going forward for Tennessee, especially over Ryan Tannehill. And at number 24, we have Gardner Minshew. I think there's always going to be a market for this type of player in the NFL. He's not going to make too many costly turnovers. Pretty good game manager, but can also extend the plays with his legs. You know, he doesn't have the highest ceiling in the world, but he does provide some stability at that quarterback position. He's a vet, and obviously coming off his best season of his career. So I'm interested to see what teams out there would be looking to get Gardner Minshew this year. And at 23, we have my quarterback. I was not looking forward to talking about Kenny Pickett because the discourse around Kenny just really pisses me off, especially people who don't watch Steelers games. It drives me nuts when I hear their takes on Kenny because I think most of them are just flagrantly wrong. I think I'm still one of the few people out there that is a massive Kenny Pickett supporter. And I get it. Like, the Steelers, they're my team. Kenny's my quarterback. I'm going to have biases towards him. If you're making your list and you're not a Steelers fan, you're probably going to be like, why the hell does he have Kenny this high? But I think that there still is something there for Kenny Pickett. I know his stats clearly do not jump off the page. There's very little to point to in terms of his production. There are some we're going to talk about, but overall, it doesn't really impress you too much to be like, oh, well, they probably need a new quarterback. No. Kenny Pickett's entire career, except for one game, which was the last game he played this season, was under the most incompetent fucking idiot to ever get a job as an offensive coordinator in the NFL, Matt Canada. That's where all the blame goes for me. Kenny Pickett, in one game outside of Matt Canada's system, had the greatest game of his career, throwing for over, 300 yards. I know he didn't have the touchdowns to show for it, but just stylistically was on a different level in that game against the Bengals. And then he got hurt. And, there's a reason why Rudolph looked so good is because Canada was gone. So it drives me nuts when people say Pickett, there's nothing there. Give him a full season this next year, now that Arthur Smith is our offensive coordinator. If he sucks next year, I'll say he sucks, but I hate when people just gloss over the fact that he had a complete incompetent moron calling his plays. There's something there with Kenny. He has the poise. He's good in the clutch. He has the arm ability. They just don't use it. They didn't under Canada. At 22, we have one of the most polarizing players in the NFL. Some people think he sucks. Some people think he's really talented. He's just been done a disservice by the Bears, and I will give that argument some validity because to me, it feels like the Bears management is stuck in 1985. I mean, what are you doing with Matt Eberflus as your head coach? Especially, this always drives me nuts. There's nothing that pisses me off more when teams do this is you bring in a young quarterback that needs development. He needs a guy to work with him to get the most out of him. And what do? You hire a defensive head coach. The history of the league tells you that that's a really bad recipe. We saw, obviously, an outlier this year with Houston doing that. But I don't think CJ needed that much development. We even said at the time he's NFL ready. Justin Fields clearly needs development. There's clearly talent with Justin Fields. But it feels like they really haven't prioritized his development. So I get it. I get both sides of the argument. In the pocket, he's not good at all. He's actually one of the worst pocket passers ever. However, his raw athleticism can show you sometimes why he looks like an elite player. So I fall somewhere in the middle of that. I do want to see him on a new team, preferably Atlanta. I want to see him just in a new spot. And I think the Bears are going to draft Caleb anyways. At 21, we have Geno Smith, and you know exactly what you're getting from Geno Smith. Some of these other guys are wildly inconsistent or from time to time just make really bad decisions. That's not what you get from Geno Smith. He might not be the most high-ceiling guy, but he's extremely consistent. And if you're Seattle, if you're okay with winning 9 games every year, maybe every once in a while making the playoffs, Geno Smith is your guy. I think he's really good for that. But in terms of being a high ceiling, a legit contender, even if you put a stacked team around Geno, I just think he's a little too limited to be a realistic contending level quarterback. But again, he's serviceable. If you're looking for just stability at that position, that's what Geno is. At number 20, we have Derek Carr, who is actually one of my most disappointing players this year. I thought this was a really good signing at the time, but now I think you could probably argue Derek Carr has one of the worst contracts in the NFL, getting elite money whenever he's good. I mean, he's above average, I guess, but this year was definitely a disappointment. I thought for sure they'd be a playoff lock, and you look at Derek Carr's stats, and it's yeah, they're not bad. I think situationally, though, in the clutch, he's not good. In the big moments, he's not good. We talked about Kirk Cousins for years not being good in the big moments. Well, I think Derek Carr is now the king of that, of just melting down whenever the lights shine the brightest. And he also feels like a guy that definitely pads his stats because, if you're down 20 points at the end of the fourth quarter and you're just throwing yeah, your numbers are going to look better. But what did you do whenever the game was actually within reach? Nothing. So Derek Carr, there's something there. He's definitely an above average quarterback, but I just don't think you can win many, high pressure games with him at the helm. At 19, we have genuinely one of the most difficult people to rank on this list, and that's Deshaun Watson. I don't know. I really am kind of at a loss for words with Deshaun Watson because in 2020, I considered him to be a top 5 quarterback on the planet. And now with, obviously the off the field bullshit going on, his injuries, like I just don't know what to do with Deshaun Watson. I feel like somewhere deep down in there, like he still has that incredible talent he had his first couple years in the league and at Clemson, but since he's gotten to Cleveland, I think even Browns fans would admit that it's just been kind of a disaster with Deshaun. I mean, like, yeah, there's very little to point to as a Cleveland Brown. And I watched him. He's in my division, so I did watch a fair amount of Browns games this year, and he only played in 6. He didn't really wow me in any of those games. I think he had, one good game before he got hurt, but overall, just, doesn't really, make winning plays, especially in the games that I watched, just didn't impress me. For the amount of money he's being paid, you can argue again, he's in that conversation for the worst contract in the NFL. I just don't know. As you guys can tell, I just don't really know what to say about Deshaun at this point. It's such a bizarre situation. So at 18, we go from one bizarre situation to another with Russell Wilson, who I think actually had a massive improvement this year because his first year in Denver was an unmitigated disaster. There was nothing positive to point to. I think now as it's aged out, I think that it was actually more on Hackett. I think Hackett is a complete fucking idiot. The fact that Hackett is still going to be the Jets OC is I get it, you're Aaron's boy, but wow, I mean, that guy is a moron. And I think that it even shows more that you bring in a competent guy with Sean Payton, who I have my gripes about Sean, but he's a good coach. Russell Wilson looked really good. I mean, he wasn't looking like Seattle Russ, but he definitely looked massively improved. It's just wow. I mean, if you would have told me before that season started, before Russ's first year in Denver, after the big trade happened, you would have told me, yeah, Russ is only going to play 2 years in Denver. I would have been like, well, what the hell happened? I mean, this has just been legitimately one of the craziest things I've ever seen happen. To go for Russ was legit a top 5 quarterback in the NFL, and so quickly, just a fall from grace. And for how effing weird it was in Denver his first year there, his dynamic, relationship with Sean Payton never really being good. I don't know. I mean, I don't even know. And I think going forward, I think he has a pretty small market, too. I only think a handful of teams are going to be interested in him for next season. So, just don't really know with Russ. I still think he's a good player, but wow, that was weird in Denver. At 17, we have Tua Tagovailoa, and has proven, if you put the right stuff around him, he can win games. He's a production machine. I do think there are some clear limitations with Tua. He is smaller. He plays a very specific type of football, and if you get him off track from that, it can go off the rails pretty fast. I think he can be rattled pretty easily because he can only beat you one way, and that's to pick you apart, precision passing. He can't really play make outside of the pocket. I think ultimately that is his biggest detriment, is his lack of athleticism in that department, his lack of playmaking ability. But just from an arm standpoint, he is one of the best pure throwers in the NFL. Just from an accuracy standpoint, definitely really good at that. People gave him a lot of crap for his performance against the Chiefs in the playoffs, which, yeah, I did too. It was kind of warranted. He just did not look good at all in that game. But keep in mind, that was his first ever playoff game in his entire career. I'm not going to say... I think there's some crazy people out there that think that the Dolphins need a new quarterback. I think that that's bullshit. But Tua is definitely a good starting quarterback in the NFL. He just has some clear limitations. So that's been it for part 1 of ranking all quarterbacks in the NFL. If you made it this far, appreciate you listening to me. Go ahead and stay tuned for part 2 where we're going to do 16 through 1. And definitely let me know your list in the comments. Please like and subscribe.